Okay, Shabbat Shalom. Maranatha to you. Welcome to the Septuagint versus the Masoretic channel, the only ministry in the world that looks at the truth of the Bible, taking the Septuagint and the Masoretic side by side, line by line. Today, however, we're not doing that. That's been put on hold because I had this topic on my mind, and my heart for the last, I guess maybe the last couple weeks now. My previous video I did was talking about, or previous two videos were on who are the true Jews, and the following video was Ethiopia in the Bible. I've had the privilege and the opportunity to watch the series from BBC, BBC News Africa, more specifically. It is a series of documentaries, episodes. It is 21 parts. I watched parts 5 to about 13 and decided to sift through that and see, learn things I didn't know about Africa as a civilization, as a people, its history, as a continent, in terms of what was presented here. Now, it's not the full Africa that was presented, but at least the highlights were covered here. So I'm going to read some of the notes that I took from this documentary series by Zainab Badawi, who is a person who was born in Sudan. I believe she is a Muslim. So the title of this video is really The History of Africa, a history of pain, PTSD, a history of being pillaged, and yet, in spite of all these things, they endured. Their culture endured to this day. I believe all these things they went through, whether we're talking about the history of pain, the PTSD, the pillaging, their slavery, has led to a form of self-hatred, and some, to a degree, a colonial mentality, an inferiority complex, and or an identity crisis. So I think that's probably where that stems from, where we have Africans who want to claim that they are Jews. So I'm going to talk about this documentary, this 21-part documentary, which I only watched episodes 5 to 13. So I watched these episodes. Beginning in episode 5, it covered the kingdom of Aksum. Actually, I watched 4 to 5, 4 to 21. So part 4, episode 4, was the kingdom of Kush. And then the rise of Aksum was the one after that. So we have kingdoms of Aksum, which include the modern nations of Ethiopia and Eritrea. You have the kingdom of Kush, which includes Sudan, modern-day Sudan. You have Put, which could be, may or may not be North Africa, possibly even Libya. You've got ancient Sudan, which was covered in the video that you're watching right there, which was called Kerma. So Kush actually came after Kerma. Kerma predates Kush. And that was a kingdom mentioned in the Bible throughout the Holy Scriptures. So the existence of these kingdoms, particularly the Kushites, I believe disprove that the Israelites or the Jewish people were black. Because from the history of Kush, Israel and Kush were two very different, distinct kingdoms with distinct religions, distinct languages, and distinct customs. So in fact, Kush is mentioned in the Bible. They say that Shabaka was mentioned. I haven't looked that up, but according to the BBC documentary, Shabaka was mentioned by name. Kush was closer to ancient Egypt in terms of religion. So that's an important point. Israel, the kingdom of Israel, made an alliance with Cush. And then it says here that Axum, the kingdom of Axum, succeeded Cush. So that's the timeline there. You have Kerma, and then Cush, and then Axum. So there is much evidence from Egyptian history to prove the existence of Cush and how they were not Israel. You can't confuse those. They are very different. Now, the Ethiopian language, their distinct, unique language, was called Gez. And then they also have, in their Ethiopic art, Solomon is depicted as ethnically fair-skinned. You even have an account, a story, I'm not going to say a myth, but according to their traditional stories, the Queen of Sheba had met Solomon, King Solomon of the Bible, and they had a child, according to their history, Ethiopian history, a son named Menelik the First. And they also believe that the Ark of the Covenant is being kept in Ethiopia and is guarded by a monk. Now that one I'm not so sure about because people claim to have never seen it, but okay, continuing on anyhow. Circa 350 AD, Christianity became the official religion of the kingdom of Axum. It's important. That's an important part of their history. The head of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, his name is Abune Matthias, admits, he believes that Jesus Christ was born of the Jews. He says, the white people, in quotes. And Saint Mary, as they refer to her, his mother, was also an Israelite. So he makes that distinction as well, that no, Jesus Christ was not black, neither was Mary, his mother. They were white people, Israelites, more specifically. And that's from episode 5, and this one we're watching right there, at the 40 minute and 30 second mark. So I'm just going to go there. You don't have to watch it, but I'm just going to put that in the background so you can see where you can find that and what it will look like. I don't want to play it, but just watch it on your own time. So the kingdom of Axum had a war. They were in war against the Jews in South Arabia, the Jews who lived in South Arabia in 520 AD. That's mentioned in the 42 minute mark in 10 seconds. I'm going to fast forward there next. There you go. There's the quote right there. And then he goes on to say about Mary as well. Meaning if the Jews are really black, there would be no need to wage war on them. That's my opinion. Okay, so we're going to just fast forward to the 42 second and 10 second, 42 minute and 10 second marker. And then go to episode 6 and talk about the notes I took there. So there you go. There's talking about the war between Axum and the Jews who lived in that area of South Arabia. Or is it South Arabia? Yeah, South Arabia. Okay. So episode 6 is next. I'm going to talk about that one briefly. So in episode 6, in the 10 minute, 20 second mark, the Jews were enemies of Axum. Okay. Let's go to that marker. Okay, the Jews were enemies of Axum. And the Jewish people dealt the final blow to the kingdom of Axum. According to this episode, there was a queen, a Jewish queen named Judith, who is said to have, right there, depicted there, who is said to have, she's the one riding the horse, she is said to have defeated Axum. And that's at the 13 minute mark. So let's go there, 13 minutes. So the Ethiopians used to keep the Saturday Sabbath. That's an important point. That's a sign that you have some people who are keeping the true Sabbath there. And this is according again to this religious leader that you see in the screen there that she's speaking with. So that's all for episode 6, all the notes I took. So there is a claim to be made that based on the video I made previously that no, the real Jews were not black. Actually, there's evidence to according to their traditions, that may not be true, because if the King Solomon had a love child with the Queen of Sheba, Menelik, that counts for something. That doesn't. It is significant. So those people who came from Solomon, King Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba, they could lay claim that I'm a descendant of King David, of even the tribe of Judah, right? They could say that, and they wouldn't be wrong. So they would have a good point there, and in fact, they do talk about that later on in the series. So the next episode is episode 7, talking about North Africa and its history. And the notes I took here was talking about Algerians who are, for the most part, Middle Eastern white people. For the sake of argument, they look like they're European, but they're Middle Eastern white people, essentially, if you want to simplify it to some degree. But they are the Berber kingdoms. They were known as the Berber kingdoms, and also you have mention of the Carthage and the Carthaginians. And the question I put here, kind of a rhetoric question, were they black or white? Well, they appear to be white. Okay, episode 8 is the next episode that I found very relevant, and that would be Ancestors, Spirits, and God. Okay, so this is all about the Jews, the history of the Jewish people in Africa. So it does cover that in great detail. It's a very good series. I strongly recommend it. It really made me appreciate African culture and history to a degree I did not know about. It really enlightened me. So I admit, when I made those 2 previous videos before this one, I was pretty ignorant of their civilization, their history, and their culture. And I do apologize if my tone in the previous videos was somewhat disrespectful. I've been humbled because of this series. So thank you very much for this series and for putting me in my place, because I don't know everything. So there you go. You got some montage there. So I wrote here this episode 8, all about the Jews in Africa. So the Jewish communities were established in Africa around the 5th century BC. That's pretty early on. Not many Jews remain to this day on the African continent. The largest contingent that stayed is in Morocco today. It has a small one of 2,500 Moroccan Jews. Okay, and at 1825, marker there, it mentions beautiful traditional Jewish costumes. Let me just go there. So they mentioned ancient Moroccan Jewish or ancient Jewish Moroccan traditional costumes. And I just want to take a look at these. They're very, very, in my opinion, very beautiful costumes. So let's take a look at those. Here it is. And you can see them a little bit closer. Give it a pause. That looks like a female costume, female clothing, possibly male there with the purple maybe. And then very beautiful jewelry in gold. And you got I think it's a Hanukkah menorah. Okay. And then there's speaking about the love child of potential love child. I cannot deny or refute it. I can only present what I listened to here. But the son of King Solomon, potentially, and Queen of Sheba, called Menelik the First. And there was a community that came out from their descendants, I believe, called the Beit, which means the house of Israel. Beit Israel. These are Jews who lived in the kingdom of Aksum. And they say they started there 2,000 years ago. So they claim descent from Menelik the First, and you see pictures of them right there. So they claim to be descendants of Menelik the First, the love child, supposed love child between King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. So they were given permission to move to Israel, to make the Aliyah there. And next it's talking about the Jews in Alexandria. There were Jews in Alexandria as well. And that's at the 28-minute mark. I'll just go there, 28 minutes. Okay, and then it mentions the 28-minute mark is talking about the Nubian kingdoms, which are found in Sudan. Okay, so that's episode 8. Episode 9, things really get really serious in episode 9. It really this gets pretty heated in the next video. And I feel like I'm going to take a lot of flack for this, but I'm just presenting what I heard in the video. I don't think it's so much my opinions, but really what was presented here. I'm just summarizing it. Okay, so let's go to episode 9. Very important, these episodes 8 and 9 in particular. So I'm going to bring up a point that I read in the book Mystery Babylon by Joel Richardson. He brought up a really good point, a great point in his book, Mystery Babylon. On page 93, he says, he mentions that Islam, they did not only conquer a territory, so they didn't just conquer geography. That wasn't the only way they conquered, but they conquered language, they conquered culture, and they also conquered religion, as you know. So it says here, Islam arrived in Africa early in the 7th century. So it's not too long after the death of the Prophet Muhammad. It spread throughout North and Western Africa by the 11th century. So it took some time, but it did eventually conquer and spread throughout North and Western Africa. It says the Arabs, according to this documentary, they arrived in Africa in the first half of the 7th century. Islam today is now the dominant religion, and Arabic is the main language in these parts of Africa, specifically. Now, at the 6-minute and 19-second timestamp, I'm going to go there. 6:19. It talks about the Arabs' intention was to spread their Muslim faith. It's not my words, it's actually from this documentary. So you can go to 6:19, and I don't have captions, but watch it for yourself. That's what it says here. So they wanted to spread their faith, which essentially means to conquer and erase all other religions. And they started with Egypt, as you see on the screen. So they began their conquest by attacking the Christians, specifically the Nubians in the north of Sudan. And in fact, they destroyed their places of worship. I don't know if I can fast forward to there. But yeah, they did. That's how they started their conquest in Egypt. They also defeated and killed the Berbers, who were either Jewish or Christian. And there was a queen in this area called, in Algeria specifically, called Queen Kahina. She resisted Islam and was eventually killed. She was eventually killed by the Arabs in Algeria. In the year 969 AD, Islam conquered Egypt. So that's all for episode 9. So I'm just going to mention some other highlights that I found interesting throughout this series. Episode 10 talks about the 3 greatest empires. They were called the Ghana Empire, where gold was more common, was common as copper. Actually, copper was valued more than gold, so gold was very common, I should say. Gold was a very common resource in Ghana, and they actually valued copper more than gold. It's a little warped, but that's just their perspective. That's how much gold they had in the Empire of Ghana. And then you have the ancient Empire of Mali. So these are all ancient African empires. So secondly, you have Mali, and I believe it's Mansun Musa, I believe was the key protagonist or key historical figure of that empire. Very important, significant figure in their history. And they also have an instrument called the kora. And then thirdly, you have the 3rd greatest empire of the ancient Africa was Songhay. And Sani Ali was their significant personage there. In episode 12, it talks about how African Muslims have an identity crisis. They think they are Arabs because for hundreds of years they identified themselves. They identified more with the foreigners than their own people. In fact, they identified more with Arab and Muslim culture. There was an estimated 14 million Africans who were shipped out to be slaves from Africa between the 7th and 19th centuries. This has to be, I'm going to repeat this, 14 million lives, African lives, were shipped out forcibly. This was not they weren't volunteering. They were forcibly kidnapped and forced into servitude between the 7th and 19th centuries. One of the worst atrocities of our human history. This is called the Indian Ocean slave trade. And what they would do to these male African slaves, the Arabs who worked in tandem with the Swahili, those who betrayed their own people from the Swahili people, they would take these slaves and the Arabs would castrate. They would castrate the male African slaves. So horrible. And the survival rate of castration was a slim 10%. So 90% chance of dying from that procedure of castration. They did this. The purpose of them castrating these male African slaves was to prevent them from reproducing with their women. So they, that's another atrocity upon another atrocity. So that's the history of Africa from this documentary series. I'm thankful for Zainab Badawi for doing this, making the efforts and traveling and doing the research, going out into some dangerous locales to really investigate and listen from the people from an African perspective and try to get some truths or traditions or oral traditions and historical accounts of what actually happened from an African perspective. That's very important, because if we look at this from, say, my perspective, like I showed you in the previous two videos, I was kind of my own perspective, my own opinions, or maybe European colonizer perspective, it's going to be a completely different story on its own. So it's important to hear all sides of the story, but in particular the side of the story that comes from the African people. So as much as the Africans had not all Africans, but in particular the Muslim Africans who identified more with the Arabic Muslim culture, I think a similar phenomenon kind of takes place when you want to also relate more to the Jewish culture, because of all this history of pain, of PTSD. One of the side effects of that could be wanting to disassociate your history, your identity with something so painful. You want to just grasp onto something more respectable, more dignified. I mean, can you blame them? I guess that's, who would want to hold on to such painful memories and a history of being mistreated and abused and murdered and castrated and all these things, women raped and all that, just treated not even like subhuman, very much disrespected. It's a despite all the pain in their history, we can see a lot of their hospitality stands out to me as one of their greatest characteristics. They're a very hospitable people. They seem to be family-centered. They're an agrarian society for the most part before the slavery, the Berber trade, or the the Indian Ocean slave trade happened. And a lot of those regions mentioned and covered remain agrarian to this day. So they just want a simple life and just to be happy, raise their families, and so on. So I covered about the Jewish thing regarding are they the real Jews or not. And so it gives us a different angle, actually, that you cannot refute and just say completely no. They can't claim nothing in terms of them being Jewish, because you actually have, you have a segment of the population, and specifically the children, the descendants of Menelik I, who purportedly was the love child of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, which technically would make them a descendant of Israel. You think about it that way. If that's true or not, I don't know. But they were given permission to move to Israel and to live there. It's a lot to take watching this documentary series, and it's a shame on our history, on our human history, of how these slaves were treated. They were forced to become slaves. Obviously, they were not volunteer. They didn't volunteer to be servants. They were literally kidnapped and forced to work, and many times were killed. In many instances, it was inhumanity, man's inhumanity to their brother. According to the Torah, according to the Bible, kidnapping anybody, not just a Hebrew, anyone, you kidnap anybody and force them to be a slave, the penalty for that is death. The Bible does not approve of that kind of treatment of any people. The only time someone can be your slave, quote unquote slave, is when they have a debt to pay you and they cannot afford to pay it, so they will volunteer to work for you to pay off that debt. Whether, whatever that amount is worth, they will pay that off through their hard work, their labor. And then once that is paid up, they're free to go. That's the way it's supposed to be. That's the biblical slavery. That's not the slavery we know of today. That is very much, I guess you could say, the slavery of Satan. And it's important to notice as well, and to mention, that the African slave trade was not just, colonizers coming in, whether it's the Arabs or the Europeans. They didn't just come in and take people. This was Africans betraying their fellow Africans. It was betrayal. They were betrayed by their own citizens because of greed or whatever it was. They just did not have the brotherly love for each other, and they backstabbed them. They literally and figuratively backstabbed them, betraying their brothers and their families, and pretty much are accountable for these lives that have been lost through the slave trade. But despite all the negative aspects of their history, I also want to point out that if one were to go with the narrative that, okay, the black people, specifically the African nations or African people, are the real Jews, then all the history, all the rich history and culture and customs and heritage that I watched and frankly admire very much, when we look at the kingdoms, the great kingdoms of Kush, Aksum, Ethiopia, ancient Kerma, and so on, then we have to just dismiss all that and say that doesn't exist, because it doesn't line up with the Hebrew history and their culture and their language. African heritage, language, culture, and history on its own is one of the richest in all of human civilization. I'm just going to say that frankly. I'm not saying that to, kind of gain favor with anybody. I have no bone in this battle. I'm not African. I'm not a European or a colonizer, or whatever you want to call it. I'm kind of neutral, so I can just say this from a neutral perspective because I have no skin in the game. I could just say this from a very honest place. They have a lot to be proud of in terms of what they had gone through, these nations that were covered in the series. The bravery that was shown through many people, their leaders that stood up to, whether it's the Arabs or the Europeans or the Portuguese, whoever it was, they had leaders who rose up at a specific time to lead the people, to show resistance, to maintain their culture, their heritage, their ways, or whether it was the golden stool, to maintain that as well and not give that up. So there is a lot to be proud of if you are an African. And I believe that should be not just cherished and treasured, but it must be protected. It must be defended. So by me releasing that video, no, the real Jews were not black, I'm actually defending African identity, African history, African culture, African heritage. Because to just claim, let's just say, for instance, I'm an African or whatever culture, and I want to lay claim to, I am actually, let's pick a country that's not in the news lately, but I'm Icelandic, okay? I'm from Iceland. No, I'm not from Iceland, but I lay claim to their history. When I know in my heart I'm not really Icelandic. I just want to claim, it's pretty much where your cultural appropriation, they call it nowadays. So why would you do that when in fact you'd be erasing your own history? Not only are you stealing another culture's history, identity, you're also destroying your own. And thereby you are wiping and erasing your people. You're kind of making yourself and your heritage extinct. If everybody had that same mindset, like a colonial mentality mindset, and just, threw away all their customs, all their values, all their heritage, all their culture that makes them special, whether you're African, Asian, or whatever particular group, whether they're Ethiopian, a very specific group. I don't want to be so vague, but whether you're Ethiopian, maybe you're Ethiopian Christian, and then you're just saying, not that they are saying this, but for example, if you are saying, just for the sake of argument, I'm Ethiopian Christian, but I'm going to just lay claim to me being the real Jew, the real Judah. And the Jewish people are not the Jewish people. They're whatever they're fakers. Well, then there's a problem there. There's a problem on two sides of the coin. Again, you're erasing your own history, which is the ancient Ethiopian history, which relates to the kingdom of Aksum, which relates to so many accounts in the Bible regarding Ethiopia, and even a lot of prophecies regarding Ethiopia as well. And then you're also erasing the Jewish people and their history. So we have to be very careful when we entertain those kinds of ideas. Not saying that there shouldn't be an open dialogue and people should not be able to have opinions, but it's important to be able to have an open dialogue and to be able to debate these things. That's why I think YouTube can endure if it allows this kind of conversation to take place where we say, okay, you think you are the real blank, then present your evidence. And I think the series, The History of Africa, with Zainab Badawi, presents a very strong argument that the African heritage in and of itself, and it's sad for me to just say African heritage because everything I just spoke about in this video is so rich with, it's just really just scratching the surface of something very, very rich with customs and just things to be proud of, a very rich cultural heritage, which I think at the backbone of it is hospitality and just really good food, music, and beautiful clothing, beautiful structures, structures. People, even admitted that they couldn't believe Africans made such structures. I mean, it shows you that our perceptions of what African history and civilization are, whether it's in our minds because of the media or Western thinking, is very wrong. We have been, I'm going to admit, I've been ignorant of a lot of these things. I've had some idea that there's value to ancient civilizations, that they were more advanced than we are. And after watching this series and learning more about African history, I can say yes, they were in a lot of ways more advanced. And I'm not saying, technologically with electronics. No, I mean in terms of their culture, the way they lived their lives, the way they treated each other, the way they prepared their children to continue their practices, their beliefs, their traditions, their culture, to perpetuate those things that they really should treasure and that they have in a lot of ways. It's kind of sad, though, when you look at the state of Africa today, that it's bittersweet. It's bittersweet because, yes, you have a unifying force in Africa, which is the religion of Islam, which unifies a lot of people in a way that millions of people now have one religion. Not all of Africa, but a large segment of Africa, North Africa, West Africa. And they have one language, Arabic. So it kind of unifies people in one way, but it's sweet, but it's bitter. It's bitter because a lot of the segments, whether it's tribes or countries that Islam had conquered in Africa, have been erased. They've been replaced with Arabic and Islam. So you have all these older, maybe traditional, people would say primitive religions that were just erased from existence. There's no trace of them left. There's hardly any traces left, except for the regions that are not Muslim majority countries in Africa. So that's all for this video. I hope this gives you some insight, some education on the history of Africa. It was very enlightening to watch this series and to really consider these things. I'm not saying everything that was presented in this series is the gospel truth, but we need to consider the possible truths. I'm not saying that it's all possibly lies, but just take it as it is, and if you can disprove it, then disprove it. But this lady and the BBC has done a tremendous amount of work to really shine a light on these parts of human history, not just African history, but human history, that really need to be passed on. They need to be preserved. They need to be taught, because I think we'd do a lot better if we just respect these ways, these cultures, these traditions, because it makes life really more enriching and more beautiful. Yeah, it's a beautiful culture. It's a beautiful people. And, I felt that my previous two videos are a little not in a good attitude and not in the right spirit. So I'm going to repent of that and just say, forgive me. I'm sorry if the last two videos were not in a very respectful tone and mindset, but I stand corrected. There is an argument to be made that the sons of Menelik could claim correctly that they are true Jews. And yeah, they do happen to be Ethiopian and of a skin color that is, people would say black, but it's technically brown. No one's really black. And there's just so much in here that is linked to the Bible and African history. And as well, I mentioned in my other video about Moses and his connection with the African nation as well. And you can read about that in the book of, I believe it's Jasher. Potentially that could be history as well. But there are a lot of ties with Moses in Africa as well. As you know, he was in Egypt and he married an Ethiopian. So that's all for this video. I wanted to set the record straight on this. I covered these videos and really wanted to dedicate the time and the honest effort and the energy to really consider it and to be open-minded about it, because I think that's very important when you're going to a topic like this that can be very controversial, but if you go in with an open mind and an open heart, then perhaps you'll come out a better person. And so now, I've admired and appreciated African people who come from Africa, but now even more so. Now it's not just something about language or food. It's really about their resilience as a people, the struggles they had to go through, and their identity that has been challenged. And in a lot of ways, they're searching for an identity. That's what we all want. We all want to be connected to our roots and to know where we came from and to feel like we belong. We have our place in this world. So that's all I have for you for this video. Thank you very much for your time. Shabbat Shalom and Maranatha. Till next time, this is the Septuagint versus the Masoretic.